All right, you are not going to believe this story. Imagine a social experiment so completely off the rails, so absolutely bizarre that it goes down in history as one of the strangest things anyone has ever tried to do. We're talking about the Akali experiment. It's a wild story about what happens when you shove 11 strangers onto a tiny raft, push them out into the Atlantic Ocean, all to prove a pretty dark theory about you and me, about human nature itself.
I mean, the setup alone sounds like the beginning of a horror movie, right? 11 complete strangers, 6 women, 5 men, all crammed onto this little raft with no engine, just drifting for 101 days straight. The guy behind it all, he was convinced, absolutely sure, he was about to unlock the secret to human violence. But what he actually unlocked? Well, that was something else entirely.
So you're probably asking, who in their right mind would dream up a scenario this chaotic? Well, let me introduce you to Santiago Genovés. He was a Mexican anthropologist, and his entire view of the world, his whole philosophy, was shaped by violence. He was just convinced that deep down, underneath all our manners and laws, we're all just aggressive animals fighting for dominance.
And, his personal life really fed this theory. First off, he was born during the Spanish Civil War, which forced him to flee his own country when he was just 15. Then, flash forward to 1972, he literally survives a plane hijacking and becomes fascinated with how people act under that kind of extreme stress. So he takes these intense life experiences, mixes them with his academic studies on, male monkeys fighting over females, and he cooks up this huge and, let's be honest, deeply flawed hypothesis.
So his big idea was basically this. If you strip away all the rules of society, and then you add in a ton of danger and a whole lot of sexual tension, men would just inevitably start competing violently for the women. He wasn't just trying to observe this, he was actively trying to prove that this is our fundamental nature.
So to test this theory, he designed this raft, he called it the Acali, to be a literal pressure cooker. It was tiny, only 12 by 7 meters, so you were always touching someone. There was no motor, which meant they were completely at the mercy of the ocean's currents. And just to top it all off, he launched the whole thing right at the beginning of the Atlantic storm season. Seriously, every single detail was engineered to create stress and spark a fight.
Okay, so the stage is set for total chaos. Now the question is, who on earth would actually sign up for this? Well, Santiago put ads in papers around the world, and hundreds of people applied. He then handpicked this really diverse crew, different nationalities, races, backgrounds, to create what he called his little world on the raft.
And here's his next big manipulation. It wasn't just that women were the majority. Santiago deliberately gave them all the positions of power. The captain, Maria, was one of Sweden's very first female sea captains. The doctor, a woman. The professional diver, a woman. He was intentionally flipping traditional gender roles upside down, hoping it would make the men feel threatened and spark this big power struggle.
The media, of course, went absolutely nuts with this. You gotta remember, this was 1973, way before reality TV was a thing. Newspapers immediately jumped on it, calling it the sex raft, and they painted this picture of a floating orgy that was destined to end in violence. The whole world was watching, pretty much expecting the absolute worst from these 11 people.
But what actually happened on the raft was the complete opposite of everything he predicted. Santiago expected a bloodbath over sex. The reality? Yeah, there was sex, but the crew later said it was just something to do out of sheer boredom. There was no passion, no competition, no jealousy. Instead of total social chaos, this surprising sense of cooperation and harmony just emerged.
Now, for Santiago, this peaceful cooperative vibe was a total disaster. It was wrecking his hypothesis. He started getting really frustrated. His big experiment was failing to produce the violence he so desperately wanted to see. So, he decided to stop being an observer and start being a provocateur.
And the big turning point came on day 51. After more than 7 weeks of peace, with the raft about halfway across the Atlantic, Santiago's scientific objectivity just completely went out the window. He couldn't accept that his theory might be wrong, so he started to actively try and sabotage the group's harmony.
And he wasn't exactly subtle about it either. He'd corner people and ask these super personal, invasive questions like, "So, who on this raft do you secretly want to sleep with?" Then he'd take their private answers and just announce them to everybody. He started spreading rumors, he made racist comments to the black crew members, and he would even throw buckets of water on people just to try and get a reaction. This wasn't an experiment anymore, it was basically just harassment.
Well, Santiago's little schemes definitely had an effect, but not the one he wanted.
He didn't create conflict between the crew members. Instead, the entire crew united against one common enemy, him. He became the one and only source of aggression on the entire raft.
For weeks, the crew just kind of put up with his antics, but his ego and, frankly, his incompetence were about to put all of their lives in danger and push them to a breaking point that even he could never have predicted.
It all went down in this series of disasters. First, the rudder broke. Santiago insisted he had to be the one to fix it. After hours of getting nowhere, he finally gives up. The crew's professional diver, a woman named Cervene, then jumps in and fixes it in 5 minutes. This sends Santiago into a jealous rage. Then, with a massive storm coming right at them, he overrules the actual captain, Maria, refuses to find shelter, and declares that he's in charge now. And the final straw? When a huge cargo ship was about to run them over, Santiago just froze in panic, forcing Maria to shove him aside and take command to save all their lives.
And all of that led to the most incredible, ironic twist of the entire journey. Santiago wanted to see if his test subjects would turn violent. Well, they did. The crew gathered in secret to seriously discuss killing the one person who was making their lives a living hell, the scientist himself.
And we're not talking about just idle threats. They came up with actual concrete plans. Should they maybe poison his water and just say he had a heart attack? Or maybe just push him overboard in the middle of the night? One crew member, Faye, even suggested this chillingly cinematic idea that all of them should hold the same knife and stab him together so that no single person could be called the murderer.
But, and this is the most powerful part, in one final definitive rejection of Santiago's entire hypothesis, they chose not to act. They proved that even when you push them to their absolute limit, even when they're faced with a genuine threat, their instinct wasn't murder. It was cooperation. They decided to just ignore him, to completely ostracize him for the rest of the trip.
So, the journey finally ended after 100 long days. As an experiment to prove his hypothesis, it was a complete and utter failure. But in that failure, it revealed something much more profound and, honestly, much more hopeful about human nature.
For Santiago, the humiliation was absolute. Get this, even before he made it back to shore, he heard over the raft's radio that the news of his unethical sex raft experiment had made it home. His university had fired him, and his academic colleagues were publicly denouncing him. His career was over.
Think about it. Our culture is filled with stories like Lord of the Flies, that book that tells us that if you strand a bunch of kids on an island, they'll turn into savages. But reality often tells a very different story. Back in 1965, a group of Tongan schoolboys were shipwrecked on an island for 15 months. They didn't kill each other. They cooperated, they built a community, and they all survived in pretty much perfect harmony. The Acali experiment, just like the story of those Tongan boys, points to the same basic truth.
And that's the beautiful paradox of this whole thing. Santiago set out on a mission to prove that human beings are fundamentally monsters. He failed so spectacularly that he accidentally succeeded in proving the exact opposite.
The real lessons from the Akali are pretty powerful. It seems that under stress, our default mode isn't violence, it's cooperation. It showed that nothing brings a group together faster than a common enemy, and in this case, that was Santiago himself. And maybe most importantly, it's this huge warning about how a scientist's own bias can completely corrupt their own work.
In the end, though, the most perfect summary comes from the man himself. In his own private journal, defeated and disgraced, Santiago Genovés wrote this one damning confession. There was only one person who showed aggression, and that was me. He went looking for violence, and he found it, staring back at him in the mirror.